Welcome to the Corruption Files on the Record, where we go straight to the official court documents, depositions, affidavits, and trial exhibits so you can be the jury. No hearsay, no rumors, just the raw record. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court with Heather. This is the Corruption Files, where we are on the record for the Delphi case. So we are going through all of the trial exhibits and all of the court documents and things that we currently have on the record. A lot of it came out after the trial because we didn't have it during the time of the trial. It was a lot of public records requests and things like that where people from the public had started collecting these items and uh, pretty much fighting tooth and nail because the court clerk was giving them a lot of trouble. Anyways, so let's first up talk about Todd Click. So our first today we're going to go over part of the Franks memo. This is part 1 of the Franks memo. But before we start on that, and I do want to preface before we even start on that, um I apologize. I missed an episode last week because you were supposed to get this Wednesday, and unfortunately, due to it was 90 degrees here in Chicago for like a straight week, I had a horrible flare up of POTS, which I am 110% positive that's what I have now. I'm in the process of being tested for it. It's taken 6 months just to get to a cardiologist. And now we're here at the cardiologist. We've got a bunch of tests that have come back. Everything's normal. There's nothing wrong with my heart functionally. So all of these like experiences that I'm having throughout the day, like just when I stand up, I get dizzy and like almost fall sometimes. Like I have to brace myself. I have to pause and get my composure because my blood pressure, not my blood pressure, sorry, my heart cannot pump my blood that has settled in my legs when I've been sitting. It can't pump the blood back up to my head. That's what POTS is. It can't pump it up fast enough. Your heart goes erratically, or at least mine does when I do this test at home. I've done it 8 days in a row. I did like a test day and then I did a week straight of all of this data, and basically it shows that I have some kind of orthostatic um, issues where my heart just doesn't regulate like a normal heart does. A normal person will stand up and after like a baseline of sitting still for 10 minutes and then you stand up for 10 minutes. This is the test you're supposed to do from home. A normal person's heart may elevate a little bit, but it won't go probably more than like 15 uh beats per minute more than your baseline. But mine, I had a day where it went 57 over, and that is almost double the threshold for POTS. So I'm I'm positive I have it. I've been positive I have it, and so it's like it's encouraging now that all my tests and things are coming out, confirming and validating the things that I've been feeling in my body for so long. And this mic keeps slipping. Give me 1 second. All right, that's better. So yeah, so my test results are coming back in a positive. POTS isn't a good thing to have, but it is. I know my body, and it's like when I had ankylosing spondylitis, I knew it before my doctors. I was telling my doctors, "You got to do this blood test because then it confirmed I have it." So it's just, sometimes you really have to advocate for yourself when it comes to medical stuff. My POTS has gotten so bad to the point where I'm having 30 incidents a day where I'm dizzy. I'm having incidents where it feels like a hot flash, but it's just your heart starts pumping extra fast for some reason. This might be actually related to another thing. So if anyone has medical issues, I really highly recommend you do this. Write up like a full medical history for yourself, put it into AI. AI caught some patterns and just with evaluating my test results, it caught some patterns and told me I need to test for this other thing that is very possible I have, which is called it's MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, which is POTS and that and this other thing, hypermobility, go hand in hand. And I'm also very hypermobile. Well, I haven't been diagnosed with it. So now I got to get diagnosed with that too, because anyways, long story. My medical history, my medical journey has been extensive. Um, Ever since my 20s, I've been having tailbone pain, chronic hip, neck pain, you name it, everywhere. It's in the joints, it's in the muscle. I get swollen joints, part of that ankylosing spondylitis. My joints swell up in my hands. It's hard to have dexterity when your hands are sore and swollen and things like that. So, what I highly recommend, anyways, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I think it's important to talk about this stuff because not everybody talks about it, and other people might be experiencing something that I am. So, if you are, definitely go to the doctor. And, if you're feeling like what your doctors are telling you is not the full picture, do the research on your own because I did so much research on my own. I can't even tell you. It was like I, for many years, I've been very focused on, trying to treat myself properly. And it's very hard to do that when you don't have the right diagnoses or things that like that. So advocate for yourself, ask doctors questions. If you think you have something, tell them, I think I have this. It doesn't matter if they are like, okay, whatever, you're just, using Google to be your doctor. If you, I mean, we all have technology in our hands where we can do research. So if you're feeling these symptoms really line up, go to the doctor about it. So advocate for yourself. Ask for the things you need, like a blood test, if you think you have something. So that's all I'll say about that. But I brought that all up to say I've been having a flare. Just talking is exhausting right now. Talking to you, it's if you can't tell. So I haven't been recording because it's been exhausting. Today is actually one of my better days in the last 8 days. So believe it or not. And I really wanted to give you guys energy put into this. So that's another reason why I'm hesitant to even record today because I don't have, I think, the energy to do this properly, but I really want to give it to you. So that's that. Little side note, little tangent about health. Take care of yourself. Okay. So let's get back to why we're here, which is the Franks memo and the other exhibits. So first, we're going to start off before we even get to the Franks memo. I'm going to shrink myself here, and this is exhibit number 1. God, I'm tired. Like I'm out of breath just talking. So I may have to pause and do this in parts. But anyway, this is a certified mail receipt that was sent from Todd Click, who we will talk about in a second. Todd Click sent this next exhibit. There's an affidavit and a letter to McLeland that we're going to read through. So this was sent to Nicholas McLeland. What's the date on here? Something 2023. I don't know. It's really hard to read that. But it's clearly in 2023, May 1st over here. Sorry. Okay. It was May 1st, 2023 is when they received it. And that's before, this is right around the time Richard Allen is getting halidoled against his will and starting to confess, which I don't think his confessions were legit at all because he was being coerced and drugged. So this is the affidavit of Todd Click. This is exhibit number 2. Comes now the affiant Todd Click and swears and affirms to the following. I am a 50-year-old male who currently lives in Rushville, Indiana. I was employed with the Rushville Police beginning of February 2021. I served as the assistant chief of police to the Rushville Police Department from January 1st to December 30, from January 1st, 2012 to December 31st, 2019. Do you remember who's from Rushville? Anyone? I do. Elvis Fields, and I believe Ned Abrams, because they roommates or he worked for him or something. There's a tie there between the two of them, and then there was another one, but his name isn't as popular, so I can't remember who it is. Um, so yeah, Elvis Fields is from Rushville. He is um former Rushville police assistant chief of police. He says he has a bachelor's in criminal justice with an emphasis in forensic psychology. That's interesting. Forensic psychology. It's his emphasis. That's not a bad thing to have to get into the mind of your criminal that you're trying to find. In June of 2018, I was approached by Detective Greg Ferenczi, RIP. He is the detective who is no longer with us. He got his office was targeted by a possible Odinite, maybe. It's not confirmed, but that has been out there on the interwebs. People are saying that the person who killed Greg was possibly an Odinite. But he was just at his work. Somebody came and like attacked the building. He went out, ran out, and he was shot and killed. And Detective Kevin Murphy regarding the Delphi murders. So these three gentlemen, Todd Click, Greg Ferenczi, and Kevin Murphy, all investigated the Odin angle. So without these three gentlemen, we would not have the Franks memo at all. So this is specifically to brief us as to what the Franks memo or where the Franks memo came from. So it was these three detectives. If you also remember, I reported this when it happened. Todd Click, the one who's writing this affidavit. Oh, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I have a doctor's appointment coming up, so they were calling to confirm. So yeah, without those three detectives, we would not have the Frank's memo. If you recall, Todd Click has some charges on him. That's what I was saying before I got the call. I haven't actually followed up on that. I will do that at some point, once we get through all these exhibits. I'm going to follow up on where Todd Click is in his legal battle. I feel like his charges were probably bogus to get him to silence him from talking about the Odinite stuff. That's my take on it. I don't know for sure. He seems like a stand-up guy. If him and these other two are looking at the Odinite angle for this case, seems like they did a very thorough investigation. We will at some point read their report, the Odin report, when we're reading through this, the Frank's memo. Okay, so those three detectives are involved. Both Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy were interested in communicating with individuals in the Rushville area that they believed may have been involved in the murders. During briefings with Detective Ferenczi, I was told that the Behavioral Analyst Unit of the FBI determined that individuals responsible for the homicides were involved in Nordic beliefs. The Behavioral Analyst Unit, or Analysis Unit, the Behavioral Analysis Unit of the FBI determined Nordic beliefs. What is Nordic beliefs? Odinites use or have Nordic beliefs. So Detective Ferenczi informed me that there was a group of individuals called Vinlanders that practice Odinism and Viking-like beliefs that resided in the Rushville area. Detective Ferenczi further informed me that the Vinlanders formed after the breakup of a white supremacy group called the Outlaw Hammerskins. So they just rebranded themselves. A white supremacist group called the Outlaw Hammerskins rebranded themselves as this Nordic religion. You can't touch our beliefs because it's religion. They just rebranded. I was aware of the Outlaw Hammerskins as they used to operate in the Carthage, Indiana area, which is near Rushville. During the course of my investigation, I spent dozens and dozens of hours reviewing documentation, communicating with our team associated with the Delphi investigation, and interviewing numerous witnesses in an attempt to determine whether or not certain individuals in the Delphi area were associated with the crimes. During the course of my investigation, my primary focus was on the following individuals: Elvis Fields, right? I said it was him. Patrick Westphal, Johnny Messer, Rod Abrams, and Johnny Messer, Rod Abrams, and Elvis Fields are all from Rushville. Then we have Patrick Westphal from Delphi. There's our Delphi connection. And then we have Brad Holder, who's in Logansport, who also has a son named Logan Holder. And Logan was dating Abby at the time of the murder. So there is our nexus, which Judge Gull failed to see every single time it was thrown in her face. She says, I see no nexus. There is no nexus. We can't talk about this stuff in trial. That makes literally no sense. Next, he says, to the best of my knowledge, Detective Ferenczi was processing his reports and other information through an FBI database. In contrast, Detective Murphy was processing his information and documentation through the Indiana State Police database. So we got FBI, Indiana State Police. He says, I was processing my information and reports through the Spillman database used by the Rushville Police Department. So we got the Rushville Police Department's database, Indiana State, and FBI. So they're getting word around the different law enforcement. He says, I recall being frustrated with the lack of continuity. Hold on one second. We got barking. Nope, she decided she's just going to growl. That's fine. He says, I recall being frustrated with the lack of continuity between the FBI database and the Indiana State Police database. So it's not everybody's getting all of the information, is what he's saying here, because the two databases were not interfaced and therefore the flow of information was inefficient and unreliable. So everyone's going back to their units, giving their, recitation of what happened, and then the other law enforcement agencies aren't getting that information. So things are happening behind the scenes and it's not getting communicated thoroughly to everybody. And who does the information get communicated to? We know it's all Unified Command. But when you ask anyone that's on Unified Command, you sit them down for a deposition, they can't remember. They don't recall. I forgot. I'd have to look at my notes. I don't remember everything. I don't recall. I mean, that's a good way to not be impeached or to not get perjury, I guess. I just don't remember. I don't remember committing those crimes and misconduct at my job. No, I don't remember that. Like, whatever. It's so stupid. Hold on. My dog needs her blanket. All right, he goes on to say, I also recall being frustrated because we, as police officers, were not allowed to take any material investigative actions without first reaching up the chain of command and getting the permission of Unified Command. Well, that's new. We didn't know they needed to go. Well, I mean, we figured that Unified Command was giving all of the orders, but these other officers really couldn't do much in regards to anything material for the investigation because everything had to be approved. Myself, Detective Murphy, and Detective Ferenczi became aware of statements made by suspect Elvis Fields that contained information that he was that he was unique to the or that was unique to the crime scene, not shared with the public and therefore of interest to the investigators. Some of these statements were made to the relatives of Elvis Field, as well as particularly troubling statement made to Detective Ferency Murphy himself, if you recall, in which Elvis Field mentioned the possibility of law enforcement officers finding spit on one of the girls. So he mentioned to two of his sisters that he was part of a gang, that he was part of a brotherhood, that he did something with this group of guys, that now he's part of this brotherhood. And he might have mentioned something about the woods too. I can't remember the exact quotes. And then he said to Detective Murphy, "If you find my spit on one of the girls and I have an excuse, would I still get in trouble?" That's what he said to Detective Murphy. It's very telling of guilt right there, of, showing his guilt, his, what's the phrase I'm looking for? I can't think of it. My brain is very slow due to less oxygen today. This flare up sucks. All right. So during the investigation, I interviewed on more than one occasion Ned Smith. That's the other guy I couldn't think about or couldn't think of. I think he's in Rushville also. Ned Smith was a very close friend of Elvis Fields. Ned was aware that the team believed that Elvis Fields may have been involved in the Delphi murders. Ned Smith attempted to protect Elvis Fields, even to the point of informing me that he had retained an attorney for Elvis Fields. Oh, I didn't know that. So Ned Smith got an attorney for Elvis. During one interview in my office, Ned informed me that he had spoken to Elvis about the murders and that Ned was not going to share with me what Elvis Fields had told him. So he's hiding information, in other words. He further commented to me, "It's not what you know, it's what you can prove." I understand this comment to mean that Elvis Fields had confided in Ned Smith incriminating facts about the Delphi murders, but that it was my job to try and convince Elvis Fields to come forward and be truthful. During the investigation, our team was able to contact Johnny Messer. Remember, he's the recruiter in between Rushville and Delphi. And Elvis, they made contact with Johnny Messer and Elvis Fields. He says, "We were able to establish a connection between Johnny Messer, Patrick Westfall, and Brad Holder. The common connection between the parties was their affiliation with the Vinlanders and their onanistic practices. During the course of our investigation, we decided to seek permission from the Unified Command to obtain a search warrant for the home of Elvis Fields and his sister Joyce Moffett. Based on some of the incriminating statements made by Elvis Fields previously referenced in this affidavit, I was told by Detective Ferency that he would make this request on the Unified Command. I never received any further information or response from Detective Ferency or anyone else regarding the status of a request for a search warrant for Elvis Fields." Huh. They did not allow or permit a search warrant on Elvis Fields, even though Elvis Fields made all of those really weird comments. They'd be really weird to say if you weren't there, right? And even if he wasn't there and he's saying these weird comments, this still counts as, this is a lead. You need to go follow it. And for whatever reason, Unified Command is denying this request or just ignoring the request. In approximately July or August of 2019, I received a call from Detective Murphy. During the phone call, we discussed the fact that the Unified Command had obtained cold case experts from Pennsylvania to take another look at the Delphi case. I was informed that said experts recommended that additional resources be directed towards the Rushville component of the investigation, but that the Unified Command had chosen not to follow their recommendation. Damn. Who thinks the unified command was put in place to stop the investigation, the true investigation to Richard Allen? Raise your hand. I do. I've always thought that. I've always thought it was their way to control the narrative, to control what information gets out. After this occurred, I am unaware of any other efforts directed towards the Rushville side of the investigation. Despite this, I continued to work on the investigation as it related to the relationship between Elvis Fields, Patrick Westfall, and Brad Holder. However, I heard nothing from the Unified Command until charges were filed against Richard Allen in October of 2022. Yikes. So he was trying to investigate this whole tie-in between Elvis Fields, Patrick Westfall, and Brad Holder. Unified Command says, oh, wait, I just arrested the one and only suspect, even though we've been saying it's been multiple people from the beginning. Now it's just that one person, Richard Allen. He goes on to say, upon reviewing the probable cause affidavit supporting Richard Allen's arrest, it became immediately clear to me that the information contained in the affidavit pointing to Richard Allen's guilt was far less compelling than the totality of the information that Detective Ferenci Murphy and myself had accumulated during the Rushville portion of the investigation. They have more evidence on Elvis, Patrick, and Brad than the state has on Allen, which we already knew. But he's putting it in a court document. He says, I also noticed that there was absolutely no reference to any of the individuals that our team had investigated. Oh, so we just don't talk about them, nor any association between the odonistic evidence that seemed to tie with the crime scene to the behaviors and actions of the Vinlanders. This revelation was shocking to me. So they did all this work, and then all of a sudden they arrest this guy. There's no Odinist ties. There's nothing about Vinlanders. There's nothing about, how he's even tied to these stick formations that are part of this Vinlander religion, if you want to call it that. He goes on to say, I then decided to seek private counsel to determine how I could best communicate my information to the Carroll County prosecutor, knowing that the high profile nature of this case could likely lead to some unforeseen legal recourse. Ultimately, I signed a one-page letter drafted by me and my attorney and directed the letter to Nicholas McClelland on or about April 23rd, 2023, via certified mail, confirming to Prosecutor McClelland that I was involved in this investigation and to further confirm to McClelland that I was aware of the investigative materials that I had generated in this case. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. After this arrest, he's like, hey, prosecutor, I'm sending you some information that might help you reevaluate your case. My goal in reaching out to Prosecutor McClelland was to ensure that the prosecution was aware of the information our investigative team had gathered, which I believe was of greater weight and relevance than the information provided in the affidavit or probable cause supporting the search warrant for Richard Allen's home. Upon directing the letter to McClelland, I heard nothing from the prosecutor's office or any other members from Unified Command until I received phone calls in August. So he sends that letter. He doesn't hear anything until August. He sends it in April. It arrives May something. He doesn't hear from them until August, the end of August, 23rd and the 25th of 2023, which involved brief discussions regarding scheduling. During these phone calls, it was requested that I meet with Trooper Jerry Holman. During the week of September 4th, 2023, I was informed that law enforcement officials intended to sit down with me and discuss with me the reason why Richard Allen was responsible for these crimes. What? So he submits evidence to you that suggests Richard Allen might not be your guy, or maybe you just don't have all of the facts in front of you. And then they're like, you know what? Why don't you come to our office? We'll convince you that Richard Allen's the right guy. Just come to our office. And Jerry Holman will tell you. Are you kidding? That's not how it's supposed to work. You're not just supposed to trust blindly the word of the cop who's investigating. I was told Jerry Holman wanted to put his mind to ease. Of course he did, because he didn't want him poking around or going to the FBI or anything. Am I right? Maybe that's why Ferenczi lost his life. Maybe that's why Todd Click got charges put on him. Maybe Murphy got the clue and was like, you know what? I am just going to sit this one out. Perhaps. I don't know. However, during the meeting with Detective Holman and this second detective, who I'm unfamiliar with, there was no discussion or offerings as to why they believed Richard Allen was guilty or the charged crimes. I believe the interview was an attempt by them to clean up their loose ends, knowing that they had given very little, if any, attention to the investigative efforts of myself, Detective Ferenczi, and Detective Murphy. They were covering their own asses. It is also true that along with my April 23rd, 2023 letter, I prepared a 3-page document summarizing our investigative team's general beliefs about what happened to the girls on the day in question. This summary is a compilation of our ideas, conversations, and conclusions drawn by myself, Murphy, and Ferenczi during our work on this case, and to date, I have been interviewed only one time by members of the Unified Command. You would think they'd want to know more about this investigation that they did, but no, which occurred in August of 2023. So the only time he got interviewed by Unified Command. Sorry, my words are not coming very easily because I'm struggling today. Um, so the only time Unified Command talked to him was after he wrote the letter to Nick McLeland, and they finally reached out to him in August later that year. So it went from April, May to August without even so much as the word. So Troopers, Holman, and Vito were the ones where this occurred. So I had been interviewed only one time by Troopers, Holman, and Vito on August 30th, 2023, but was not specifically questioned about the summary I provided or the other contents in my investigative file, which contained approximately 87 pages of Rushville Police Department police reports, as well as hours upon hours of video interviews, audio interviews, photographs, materials extracted from social media, and evidentiary material. Further, the affiant saith not. That's like my favorite line. Further, the affiant saith not, meaning the person who is doing this affidavit has nothing further to say. I just love how it's worded. Um, Anyways, so that is from Todd Click. And now let's look at his letter to Nick McLeland. That was his affidavit about it all. This is his letter. It's short. We don't have the 3-page summary, unfortunately. But this says, Mr. McLeland, it's, as you can see, it is dated April 29th, or sorry, 28th, 2023. I think he said 23rd. He says, Dear Mr. McLeland, my name is Todd Click. I am the Assistant Chief of Police. I need to make this bigger because it's hurting my eyes. It's better. Chief of Police with the Rushville Police Department from January 2012 to December 2019. In 2018, I was asked to assist in the double homicide investigation of Abby Williams and Liberty German, along with the Terre Haute PD Detective Greg Ferenczi, and Indiana State Police Detective Kevin Murphy. I write to ensure that you have excuse me. I write to ensure that you have been provided with all of the information associated with my investigative efforts for your use in this case. So he's basically just saying, here is all of it. I'm sure he enclosed it or something. I retired from the Rushville Police Department in 2021. I have attached a summary of the investigation based on my memory of events for your convenience. If you should have any additional questions, please contact me at your convenience. So that was provided to Nick McClellan after Richard Allen was arrested, and along with his summary and good, reasonable proof, or reasonable, what's the word? Reasonable doubt, enough reasonable doubt to maybe, or probable cause would be the word, probable cause to get a search warrant, probable cause to take action in some form. But yet, Nick McClellan just sits on it. And remember the letters from Reese Davis, who he was writing to Nick McClellan too around the same time, trying to get him to realize that this Ron Logan was admitting to the crimes in prison. He admitted, he confessed. And Nick McClelland ignored him and then pretended like, what letters? I don't know what letters you're talking about. You crazy, girl. Basically, it was his response. So, yeah, they said that they didn't receive some of them and whatever. And none of them were turned over, obviously, to the defense. So that was a big discovery issue. It was a big problem. So then now we have another discovery issue here where this investigative team is like, hey, I just want to make sure you're aware of these things because it doesn't really line up with your probable cause affidavit. There's some things missing that you don't have. So I just want you to be aware. And they're like, nah, we're good. Nah, we're good. All right. I know we're already 35 minutes in. I'm out of breath, but we're going to do this the best I can. So here it is, the Franks Memo. We're going to read through a good portion of the beginning here. So, the memorandum in support of the accused's motion for the Franks hearing. Franks hearing is basically saying, look, we have all this other evidence that we would like the court to be aware of, and we want to introduce this on the record. This is pre-trial happening. So, that's what this is. So comes now the accused, Richard Allen, by and through Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rosie, and files his memorandum in support of his request for a Franks hearing. Introduction, and now we have our first footnote, which says, for the court's convenience, the defense has provided a glossary of names marked as Exhibit 125. This glossary provides an alphabetized list of almost every name mentioned in the memorandum along with a brief description of their involvement. I'm not sure if it's actually in here, but maybe we'll see. We'll find out. All right. So because the facts in this memorandum are dense for anyone not yet completely familiar with this case, and we start like this is the filing that got everybody interested really in Delphi if you weren't already, because this was like, wait a minute, we're getting a different story from the defense than what the state is saying. So people started paying attention very closely after this. So I believe it served a purpose in that sense, but obviously, we all know Judge Gull never gave a Franks hearing. She never even read the damn things. She admitted to it. So there's that. He says the purpose of this introductory, or did I finish that sentence? He says similar to a syllabus. Okay. So the purpose of this introductory section is to provide the court a general understanding of what to expect concerning the facts upon which the defense will be relying and how those facts impact the legal arguments before providing the necessary detail, minutia, and notation to the record that could bog down the court in as it attempts to unpack the defense argument. So even before she gets into the arguments, they give her like a background so that they kind of educate her so that she isn't coming into this blind. Yet she still didn't want to read it. Hold on, my dog wants to go outside. I'll be right back. He goes on to say, the defense, therefore, will provide little attribution as to the source of the evidence in this introductory section, but will then provide proper attribution or attributing sources to the evidence throughout the body of the memorandum following the introduction. They provide a table of contents, and it is in 5 parts. We're going to try to get through the thing in 6. It's 136 pages. We're going to get started. But first, here are the 8 things to know about the Odinism, or about this case, I guess. So, 8 things to know according to the defense. Overwhelming evidence in this case supports the following. Members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. They just come right out and say it. Richard Allen didn't do it in their very first sentence. Richard Allen didn't do it. It was members of this pagan Norse religion called Odinism. Very clearly on, those in charge of the Delphi murder investigation claim that they consulted with a Purdue professor concerning what resembled possible Odinism signatures left behind the crime scene. After the Purdue professor proclaimed, according to State Trooper Jerry Holman, that it was not Odinism or any type of cult worshiping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime, the Odinism angle was essentially abandoned. So Jerry Holman says it wasn't Odinism and they stopped investigating it. However, as of September 7th, 2023, the leaders of the investigation team, one, claim that they can't identify who the purported professor was. We know that now. Two, what was his name? It's escaping me at the moment. Like I said, my brain, I'm tired. I don't have a lot of energy today. But the Purdue professor, they say they forgot his name and they can never find him. They've also reported, they have provided no reports, They have provided no reports from this purported professor that states that it's not Odinism. And then three, same thing, if we were numbering it A, B, and C. 3, have further indicated that they may never be able to provide this figure or this professor to figure out who he is and provide him. They'll never be able to do it. How do you not know your sources, your people that you're using for a case, that you interview for a case, that have told you, apparently, given you reports on particular Odinism? Based in large part upon this mystery, Purdue professor's opinion, the Delphi investigative leadership claimed that it is essentially abandoned considering Odinite involvement in the murder. So they don't think that it's involved. Leadership just said, we abandoned it. And then the years passed. So the crimes happened 2017, then 2018, 19, 2022, 2021, 2020, 20. And thankfully, during those passing years, law enforcement officers Kevin Murphy, Greg Ferenczi, and Todd Click continued to pursue the truth. That's pretty powerful. If it weren't for those 3 detectives, we might not have any information about these Odinists. Because of their curiosity and investigative efforts, the evidence establishing the names of the likely murdering members of this Odinite cult became known to the Delphi investigative leadership no later than February 2018. So, a year later, at least within a year of the crimes, they knew who Brad Holder was. They knew who Elvis Fields was. They knew Patrick Westfall. They knew the names of these people already, had them on their radar, probably already interviewed them, but oopsies, got taped over. So they knew these people first, long before they even ever I mean, they talked to Richard Allen early on, right? But they never suspected him until 2022. What gives with that? And why are these other individuals just suddenly, cleared or whatever? Due to either incompetence or a concerted intentionality. I love very good language, wording that just I love it. Due to either incompetence, so the prosecutors and the investigative team were either incompetent or they concerted intentionally to put those that those in charge of the investigation refused to arrest or even properly investigate those suspects. So the unified command might have been there intentionally to make sure that the truth never came out. Is like I said, that's my suspicion as to why unified command was created, or one of their, maybe it wasn't why it was created, but it was one of their key purposes. Number 3. On May 1st, 2023, the state of Indiana, by way of prosecutor Nick McClelland, received a letter from former Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click, now retired. We just read that. And it says, find attached certified receipt and the email. So we read through both. We also had his affidavit, which is one of the next footnotes here. All right, so as stated in the previous paragraph, Click, Murphy, and Ferenczi were 3 of the law enforcement officers who worked in the Delphi murder case, particularly focused on the O to night angle as it intersected with the suspects in Rushville, Indiana. After reading Richard Allen's probable cause affidavit, Click became concerned that the information contained in Richard Allen's affidavit pointing the finger at Richard Allen was far less compelling than the totality of the information that Detective Ferenczi, Detective Murphy, and Officer Click had accumulated during the Rushville portion of the investigation. The information that Murphy, Ferenczi, and Click had gathered during their investigation connected men who practiced Odinism in or near Delphi with another group of men who lived in Rushville, and then connected both groups of men to the murders. He connected both groups of men. Find the affidavit. So that's what he explains in the affidavit, which we already read. So Click was concerned that for some reason, the leadership of the investigative team had failed to share with Prosecutor McClelland the evidence gathered by Click, Ferenczi, and Murphy. Well, I wonder why he would come to that conclusion. Maybe because the person you arrested wasn't any of the people that they had their eyes on. Probably, those people, what did they think? Like, literally, what did McClelland and all the investigators think? Like, these people were just going to go away? Or just be silent about their investigation and pretend like, oh no, you got the right guy? Did they think no one was going to be like, hey, excuse me, over here, you forgot this information? Is baffling to me. And then it makes you wonder why one was killed and one has charges on them now. Click's concerns led him to seek out a lawyer to assist him in the drafting of a letter. This letter was then sent to McClelland. This letter was not provided to the defense until after it was obvious from the last round of depositions that the defense who had doggedly pursued witnesses as far away as Georgia, would certainly be talking with Todd Click. McClelland had this letter in his possession for over 4 months before turning it over to the defense. There can be no mistaking that this letter is exculpatory in nature and could have been used by the defense as it prepared for upcoming depositions. Of course it is exculpatory for Richard Allen. However, it is apparent that McClelland only offered up the letter after it was obvious that the defense team would soon be learning of the letter's existence. So they knew, oh, they're going to find out, so I guess we better turn it over. Hold on, my dog wants to go out. Again, if you can hear the bell ringing in the background, that's him. Because I had to. Jeffrey Turco is the Purdue professor, Jeffrey Turco, Dr. Jeffrey Turco from Indiana. What is it? Purdue, sorry. He's the Purdue professor that did write up in his report stating that it could align with Odinism, although Jerry Holman lied and said they said it didn't. So the defense is about to learn about this letter from Todd Click, and then the state's like, oh, wait a minute, here we have some discovery for you, even though this is now months later that they're receiving it. In other words, the defense team would obviously be meeting with or deposing Click in the next few weeks. At that time, Click most certainly would then reveal to the defense that in April 2023, he had sent a letter containing exculpatory information to McClelland. So that would have been quite a surprise if they went in there and found that out. So they had to get on top of it. Where was I? Click had sent a letter, blah, blah, blah. At this point, McClelland had two distinct choices: sit on the exculpatory evidence, hoping that the defense team would refocus its efforts on another angle in the investigation, or two, disclose the exculpatory evidence, claiming that the contents of the letter were overlooked in the volume of discovery. What do you think he did? One or two? He chose the latter. Unfortunately for the state, neither approach explains away the fact that Click specifically directed the letter to McClelland himself, and further, Click was so determined to ensure his information was consumed by McClelland that he directed the information directly to McClelland via certified letter. So he didn't just, reach out to another investigative team. He actually wrote a letter to McClelland. The letter was stamped, received May 1st, 2023, Carroll County Prosecutor. Click's report landed at ground zero. It went nowhere. A prosecutor's office with no more than 2 full-time prosecutors and a handful of full-time staff members at best. Could this exculpatory evidence have been completely overlooked? Not plausible. Not only did the prosecution withhold this letter from the defense, but law enforcement also withheld several other exculpatory pieces of evidence, including an 85-page compilation of reports by Click, prepared in 2029, and several videos containing statements that support the defense theory of Richard Allen's innocence. Wow. This 85-page report details the investigative work performed by Click and others, including the FBI. So this is also, this is not the Odin report. This is just Click's report. He had a 85-page compilation. According to the summary of Click's investigation that he attached with his letter, the Behavioral Analysis Unit of the FBI determined that the individual or individuals responsible for the homicides were involved in Nordic beliefs. That would be footnote number 5. Find attached the summary that Click attached with his letter. We don't have that, unfortunately. It says Odinists have Nordic beliefs. So there must have been some kind of research about Odinists there. This was news to the defense, as no member of the Unified Command in charge of the investigation revealed this information to the defense during recent depositions. This includes Trooper Holman, who told the defense that he didn't remember if the FBI's BAU unit determined one way or the other whether those with Nordic beliefs had been involved in the murders. The defense will be providing all depositions identified throughout this document separately from the exhibits. We already read through Holman, we read through Lesenby, and we read through Liggett's. There will be some more coming up that we haven't read yet, but those people are more on the side that it was Odinists, so we'll get into that later. So where did I leave off? At least up until the time of this filing, the prosecution has provided no evidence whatsoever of the findings of the FBI's BAU unit concerning involvement of Odinist in the murders. None. The letter that Click sent to McLeland was the first that the defense has heard that the FBI actually believed that Odinists were likely involved. First time they're hearing it. In other words, the report contained exculpatory evidence that Unified Command concealed from the defense. Unified Command is sealing this stuff or concealing this stuff from the defense. This information was and is crucial for Richard Allen's defense. Some of his exculpatory evidence, in the form of videos, was finally released to the defense on September 8th, 2023, over 9 months after the defense counsel entered their appearance. Wow. So we knew there were discovery issues, but this was happening even before the Franks Memo came out. The defense is still reviewing this September 8th evidence dump. In the brief time the defense has had to review this newly received evidence, it has found exculpatory evidence both in the video the defense has watched and the documents that the defense has reviewed. While the prosecution has been holding on to this exculpatory evidence, Richard Allen has been living in hell. This is why he's been already drugged and whatnot at this point. Lastly, the evidence will show that the week of August 28, 2023, Prosecutor McLeland and State Trooper Jerry Holman requested a meeting with Todd Click. By this time, the defense team had taken several depositions, including Holman, Liggett, and Lesenby. And the prosecution and Delphi investigative leadership now knew that for a while the defense team had been aware of the Odinist evidence. At least the evidence that the prosecution turned over to the defense. Do you see this dog? He likes to lay with his head backwards. He's so weird. Yeah, he does this. The prosecution had learned in early August that the defense had figured out the strong Odinist ties to the crimes despite the apparent attempts of the prosecution, Liggett and Holman, to hide this exculpatory information from the defense. Wanting to allay his fears that an innocent man was sitting in Westville, Click agreed to attend the meeting with Holman, hoping that he would be learning that evidence did in fact exist linking Richard Allen to the murders. Click's hopes were dashed. Paragraph 17 of Click's affidavit. Upon directing the letter to Mr. McLeland, I heard nothing from the prosecutor's office or any other members of Unified Command until I received phone calls on August 23rd and August 25th later that year, which involved brief discussions regarding scheduling. During those calls, it was requested that I meet with Trooper Holman during the week of September 4th. I was informed that law enforcement officials intended to sit down with me and discuss with me the reason why Richard Allen was responsible for these crimes. I was told that he, Jerry Holman, wanted to put my mind at ease. However, during the meeting with Detective Holman and a second detective who I was unfamiliar with, there was no discussion or offerings as to why they believed Richard Allen was guilty of the crimes. I believe the interview was an attempt by them to clean up their loose ends, clean up the part of the investigation that you don't want out there. That's what they were doing. Knowing that they had given very little, if any, attention to the investigative efforts of myself, Ferenczi, and Murphy. Not only did the Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett fail to include all this Odinite information in his October 13th, 2022 affidavit for search warrant, and not only did McLeland and the Unified Command withhold exculpatory evidence, Liggett also concealed damaging witness statements that devastate Liggett's timeline. A timeline Liggett needed to be true in order to place Richard Allen in the trail when Abby and Libby were abducted. They had to finagle the timeline to make Richard Allen be there when he actually had told them he was already gone for the day. Additionally, Liggett lied in his affidavit about the statements of another key witness, further devastating Liggett's timeline. That I'm not sure what that was referring to. Liggett lied in his affidavit about the statements of another witness. Was it maybe Betsy Blair? Or not Betsy Blair. Um, Sarah Carbow. Maybe they're talking about the changing it to Bloody. Richard Allen has zero connections to any pagan cult or pagan cultists, and furthermore, no forensic evidence such as DNA or electronic evidence links Richard Allen to the girls or to the crimes, i.e., he is a completely innocent man. There's no ties. Most of the evidence backing these assertions was found scattered over no less than 10 hard drives and several flash drives provided by the prosecution, meaning that the defense is not making wild accusations, but rather primarily relaying facts and information that is backed up by the prosecutor's own discovery. Even discovery that the prosecution just provided to the defense as late as September 8th, 2023, after Richard Allen's already been in prison for almost a year. Not coincidentally, members or Odinists of this pagan group or pagan cult are employed as corrections officers for the Indiana Department of Corrections at Westville Correctional Facility. So they knew, I think this comes out in like September of 2023. Let me make sure. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so September 18th, 2023 is when this document was filed. So it is up to date until September 2023. I should have given you guys that background beforehand. Sorry. So next, he says, or they say, not coincidentally, members or Odinists of the same pagan cult are employed as correctional officers for the Indiana Department of Corrections at Westville Correctional Facility, which is where Richard Allen is housed. It is inside of a cold concrete walls that of a maximum security prison of this dilapidated reformatory that Richard Allen is being threatened, intimidated, and mentally abused. Another footnote here that says the defense counsel is not saying that the Westville guards were involved in the murders, only that they were likely involved in threatening, intimidating, and mentally abusing Richard Allen. These are the guys that had the Odinist patches on their sleeves. Where did 7 come from? Oh, I thought it was way higher in the page. Throughout this document, references are made to the Unified Command. Essentially, the Unified Command was the leadership, quote unquote, of the Delphi murder investigation, according to Tony Liggett, who was Carroll County Sheriff and member of the Unified Command. Unified Command consisted of law enforcement from a variety of entities, local, state, and federal. Unified Command were overseers of the entire investigative operation. According to Liggett, the members of the Unified Command are and were from Carroll County, that would be Tony Liggett and Kevin Hammond. From State Police, Jerry Holman, Jay Harper, and Dave Vito. From the FBI, Rich Davies. Got a footnote here that says, although the state police superintendent Doug Carter pulled the plug and kicked the FBI off the Delphi murder case around 2021, I'd like to know more about why that happened, over some conflicts, according to Jerry Holman. Interestingly, Tony Liggett, who was deposed before Holman, claimed under oath that Doug Carter was not involved in making decisions for the case. Furthermore, Liggett claimed to be unaware that the FBI was even kicked out, let alone that any agency had actually kicked out the FBI from investigating the Delphi case would never have been discussed between Liggett. Wait, I just skipped a line. Sorry. So that was the end of that sentence. Okay. It is quite odd that the salient topic of Doug Carter kicking the FBI off of the Delphi case would never have been discussed between Liggett and Holman, who were working so closely with one another in the unified command. Yeah, they're saying, so like, why didn't that come up in the depositions? It's odd that they didn't say something when Doug Carter, um he was very prominent in like the press releases and conferences, press conferences that he would do. And he's not even, they have a guy that does that. So why Doug Carter? Why did he get involved so much in it? It's very odd to me. What else? Where did I leave off? It's quite odd. I think okay, if that can be believed, it would be quite perplexing. Miriam, nope, we're not on that one yet. Sorry, we're not on that footnote yet. I totally went too fat. Hold on. Yeah, the one dog dragging my arm down because he's fallen asleep, but then he's like dead weight when he's asleep, and then the other dog is just growling because she heard someone shut a car door. Who cares? It's just a car door. You're okay. You guys have dogs that just bark at everything. It's so annoying. Okay, now we're going to get into Odinism. What is it? Odinism is the pagan religion referenced above, and its followers are called Odinites. Odinites are enamored of Viking/Nordic culture. Evidence supports that at the crime scene, these murdering Odinites left behind obvious signatures, symbols in the form of runes. And that would be Merriam-Webster defines a rune as any of the characters of any of several alphabets used by the Germanic peoples from about the 3rd to the 13th centuries. They look like letters, but they're not letters we're familiar with. So, they could be letters to them, to the Germanic cultures of the 3rd to 13th centuries. These runes were formed with sticks, fashioned with tree branches, and painted with the blood of Liberty German, the F tree. Sticks and tree branches were deliberately, carefully, and proficiently placed on each girl in a certain arrangement mimicking certain runes. At least one of the branches appeared to have its end cut off cleanly by some type of tool like an electric saw, providing proof of a preconceived plan. Because where'd you get that? You must have brought with you either the branch that was pre-cut or you brought a saw with you, some kind of an electric saw that you did there on the scene. You cut the tree down. Additionally, the blood of Liberty German was used as the paint to mark a tree with a rune that looks similar to an F, but the lines kind of go up on a diagonal. We have a footnote here too. It says many runes look like the letter F, including the rune called, I'm not even going to try to say that, it is spelled ANSUZ, which among other things stands for Odin. There's also another one that I think is like Fiha or Fihra or something. I can't remember what it's called, but that stands for like riches, wealth. So maybe they were doing a sacrifice for riches. Don't know, but or just in the name of Odin, could have been. With a simple Google search, these runes would be identifiable as one of the many calling cards of this pagan religious cult. So this is not like rocket science. It's very clear that this cult uses these runes specifically. Yet, law enforcement in charge of the Delphi investigation seemingly and quickly abandoned the obvious correlation between the crime scene and Odinism, despite an obscene amount of evidence linking Odinism to the crime scene. And even in spite of powerful evidence linking specific Odinites in and around Indiana to the murder. So there are specific Odinites in mind. It's not just the fact that it's Odinist, but we also have suspects that we could be looking at. But instead, we're ignoring them and arresting Richard Allen. Got it. Also, the court will learn in his affidavit for search warrant that Sheriff Liggett failed to inform Judge Diener that nothing, absolutely nothing, links Richard Allen to Odinism or any religious cult. That's according to a deposition of Liggett. So Liggett says nothing's going to link Richard to this Odinist cult. So then how did you get Richard Allen? Also, no forensics such as DNA, no electronic data extracted from his computers or phones or from his social media links Richard Allen to the crime scene. So that again begs the question, why him? Why him? Additionally, nothing links Richard Allen to any of the Odinite suspects, the same Odinite suspects that evidence strongly supports sacrificed Abby and Libby in some sort of pagan ritual. Richard Allen had nothing to do with this crime, but rather is an innocent man, a patsy for the police, arrested 26 days before an election. Bam. That's a nice line. I like it. I'm going to highlight it. Failure to pursue the Odinist links. Law enforcement's failure to actively pursue the obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism is confounding. It is even more confounding when, days and weeks after the murders, a particular Odinite from Logansport named Brad Holder posted on social media images mimicking the very runes found at the scene, a crime scene unreleased and unknown to the general public even to this day. Who was Brad Holder? He was an Odinite whose son Logan had been dating Abby. Brad Holder's social media posts seemingly taunted the very police that refused to fully investigate him. The defense believes that the court will be shocked at the number of clues or Easter eggs, both before and after the murders, that Holder openly posted on his Facebook page. He posted a ton of images of the woods, just trees, pictures of stick formations and things. He also had pictures of girls who were laying on the ground, probably in similar positions to Abby and Libby, and they had branches and sticks all over them. So, yeah, there's a lot of evidence pointing to Brad Holder. However, a fact that is simply mind-blowing to the defense is that Brad Holder was never considered a suspect in the murders of Abby and Libby. State Trooper Jerry Holman, one of the law enforcement officers in charge of organizing and investigating the Delphi murders, claimed in his August 10th, 2023 deposition that Brad Holder was not really ever a suspect. That's Holman's deposition. Police reports written near the time of the murders reveal that Jerry Holman is telling the truth. Brad Holder was cleared as a suspect quickly. By March 16th, so a month later, it's cleared. On March 1st, 2017, Tony Liggett stated in a report that there were no leads required concerning Brad Holder, meaning that it was not necessary for law enforcement to continue to look for leads related to Brad Holder. Liggett made that determination a mere 15 days after the girls were murdered. By March 16, 2023, Unified Command member Kevin Hammond wrote that Brad Holder had been charged. I'm sorry, had been cleared. Brad Holder had been cleared. That would be charged as something different. Get it together, Heather. He says he's been cleared. The girls hadn't been dead for 30 days, and Unified Command had already cleared Brad Holder as a suspect. Unified Command had already cleared Brad Holder as a suspect within 30 days, knowing that Brad Holder's son dated Abby. Unified Command had already cleared Holder as a suspect within 30 days of the murders, although a simple review of Brad Holder's Facebook page would show that he was a proud Odinite that had an absolute obsession and fascination with runes. People knew, or had to know, that runes had been left at the crime scene. Additionally, Unified Command had already cleared Holder as a suspect in spite of the fact that those runes found on Holder's Facebook pages mimicked runes found at the crime scene that had not been released to the public. That's consciousness of guilt was the word I was looking for later, or the phrase of term I was looking for a long time ago. It just popped into my head just now. I said he was guilty, whatever, same thing. Um, Additionally, Unified Command had already cleared Holder as a suspect, in spite of the fact that the runes were found on his Facebook page, and it had never been released to the public. So he has pictures of what the runes at the crime scene looked like that he posts publicly. Nothing happens to him, and law enforcement doesn't think twice about that. That's bizarre, right? The investigation had barely begun, but the Unified Command had already cleared the very man that any person with even a small amount of common sense or curiosity would believe was a strong candidate for being involved in the murder of the girls. For example, the court will also learn that the Unified Command was aware of a very disturbing image on Brad Holder's social media accounts that actually mimicked the crime scene on April 12th. April 12th. Trooper Joseph Ryan Winters receives a phone call. I'm telling you, this is like February, March, April, so like 3 months later. Joseph Brian Winters receives a call from a man in Georgia named Ryan Boucher, who had discovered disturbing images in Brad Holder's social media account. Having somehow learned that Brad Holder's son had dated Abby, Mr. Boucher began reviewing Brad Holder's social media history. Well, how does this guy even know about, like, who these people are? Maybe he was involved with them at some point and wants to, like, turn them in, but didn't want to turn himself in. I don't know. Or maybe he knows of them. Maybe they have a reputation where he's from. So, on one of the did I yeah, I read all that. Okay, so on one of the images that Boucher viewed on Brad Holder's social media account was an image of two women either dead or posed as if they were dead on the ground in what appeared to be a forest. Both women had limbs and sticks arranged on their bodies. I know I've showed this, or I think I've showed this before. I've seen it before, but I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I can show you it. I don't think it was part of um, it wouldn't have been because Brad Holder wasn't a suspect, so none of this comes into trial. Remember? Because the state filed a motion eliminating that nothing about runes, Odinism, the Purdue professor, none of that was allowed to come in to trial. Basically leaving the defense very handicapped in defending themselves. Both women had tree limbs and sticks arranged on their bodies. One of the women had her arm stretched out above her head, similar to the way that Libby's arm was stretched above her head. Both women were clothed, and the stick and tree branch formations on the girls was different than the sticks. And the stick and tree branch formations on the girls was different than the stick and tree branch formations on Libby and Abby, but otherwise it bore a very eerie similarity to the murder scene. How do you explain that one, Brad Holder? Ryan Boucher had no knowledge of the actual crime scene. However, after reviewing Brad Holder's social media sites, Boucher was disturbed at that image, as well as other images that provided insight into Holder's fascination with runes. believing that the disturbing images may be something of interest to those investigating the Delphi murders. Mr. Boucher contacted Tobe Lesenby, who was the sheriff of Carroll County. Lesenby quickly rebuffed Boucher, telling Boucher that Holder was not a suspect. Undeterred, Mr. Boucher contacted the state police, where he ended up talking to Joseph Ryan Winters, Trooper Joseph Ryan Winters. After their conversation, Winters memorialized the interaction and placed the images provided by Boucher into a Dropbox. After creating the report, Winter then discussed his findings face to face with Jerry Holman of Unified Command. The body of this memorandum will provide details of that interaction in his report. Winters requested law enforcement to re-interview Brad Holder. The defense does not believe Unified Command ever followed up with Winters' request. So Winters request that you should re-interview Brad Holder. I agree. If you lost footage of any of these people, you need to go back and try to recreate it as best as possible. Or even if it's a brand new interview, so be it. At least, you got something on the record. But Winters requested this to re-interview Brad Holder. Re-interview him. The defense does not believe Unified Command ever followed up on Winters' request. So they just ignored him. Followed protocol as usual. Ignore, ignore, ignore. Until you can't ignore it anymore, right? At some point, you're not going to be able to. I had to go make myself some coffee. So it's sleepy. I don't know. It just feels like an overcast, sleepy kind of afternoon as I'm recording this. Anyways, it goes on to say the defense does not believe Unified Command ever followed up on Winters' request to re-interview Brad Holder. It should be noted that the disturbing images found by Boucher in Georgia and placed in a Dropbox by Winters were not, and still have not, been provided to the defense. The defense still doesn't have the discovery on this. In his recent deposition, Winters said that he had attempted to locate the images but was unable. However, because of the potential importance of those images to Richard Allen's case, the defense team located Boucher and then traveled to Georgia to meet with him. Those images are now in the possession of Richard's defense team, who then provided those images to law enforcement. Again, these were important images that law enforcement failed to turn over to the defense. So prosecutors didn't turn it over to the defense. So the defense goes out, gets it themselves, and then turns it over to law enforcement. Instead, the defense located the images in Georgia and then returned them over to the very people who had the obligation to provide them to the defense. Because law enforcement should have done it in the first place. Should have given it to prosecution. Prosecution should have turned it over. They're like a team, prosecution and the law enforcement. It's like an extension of one another. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. It's not supposed to be like that, and it shouldn't be like that, and that's how you get bias and unfair courts system. But that's how it is. Unified Command, which included Tony Liggett, who drafted the affidavit for search warrant, was fully aware of the mimicked crime scene on Brad Holder's social media, as well as other posts that mimicked the exact ruins found at the crime scene, but failed to do anything about it, and failed to inform Judge Diener of this obvious suspect, Brad Holder, and all of the evidence that existed against Holder, making him a prime suspect. The court will learn in the body of this memorandum that Holder was connected to the crimes, the crime scene, and to other men who had confessed to the crime. The evidence of those connections will be provided in the body of the memorandum, including copies of the images found on Holder's Facebook page at the time of the investigation, which link Holder to the scene, as well as images found by Boucher that law enforcement has failed to turn over to the defense. Seems like they just keep forgetting to turn things over to the defense. Why is that? Everything that they get or should be getting in discovery should be going to the defense like almost instantaneously, but it's not. The defense will also attach that that the defense calls what the defense calls, sorry, the Winters report. I don't believe we have that. I think that might be one of the ones that we don't have, but don't quote me on that. If we do have it, we will go over it. Which is a memorialization of Trooper Winters' interaction with Ryan Boucher. Liggett provided none of this evidence or information to Judge Diener, but rather allowed Judge Diener to believe that Richard Allen was a lone suspect in the murders, in spite of zero evidence linking Richard Allen to the crimes at the time that Liggett sought the search warrant 26 days before an election. They've emphasized that twice now because it's telling that you want to close this case so you can win your election. Unified Command's failure to vigorously pursue the obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism is even more perplexing when evidence known to law enforcement demonstrated a clear nexus between Brad Holder and at least 4 other suspects: Elvis Fields from Rushville, Patrick Westfall from Delphi, Johnny Messer from Rushville, and Rod Abrams from Rushville, now living in Connorsville. Unified Command was aware that Elvis Fields confessed to his sister that that Elvis was involved in the murders, even providing to his sister intimate crime scene details of which only those present at the crime scene would have any familiarity. Additionally, Elvis Fields told his sister Mary on February 14th, the day the girls were found. It was the day after they went missing, the day the bodies are found. Elvis Fields tells his sister Mary that he was present at the killings and that he now had a brother and was part of a gang. In February 2018, so a year later, Elvis had been questioned by law enforcement but denied involvement in the murders. However, after being dropped off at his trailer following the questioning, Elvis turns around, walked back to the police car, and, according to the police report, asked the state trooper if Elvis's spit was found on the girls, would he be, and he could explain it away, would he still be in trouble? The state trooper that heard Elvis utter these words was Kevin Murphy, and he was not part of Unified Command. So he wasn't part of that filtering of information that kept all that information close. He actually was like, yeah, I'm going to tell people about this. So he was not part of Unified Command, but immediately he relayed that Elvis's disturbing question, he relayed that to Jay Harper of Unified Command. Elvis also admitted to a different sister, now named Joyce, that he had, in fact, spit on one of the girls. Elvis told Joyce that he was on the trail and on the bridge with 2 girls that were killed and that he was going away for a long time. Why would you tell your sister that if it wasn't true? I don't know Elvis's mental health. I don't know anything about him other than he hangs with these Odinists and he said these things, which makes me think that there's enough probable cause to approve a search warrant, which was never requested by Unified Command. This is outrageous. Elvis's alibi for February 13th, 2017 was also probably flawed. State troopers who weren't part of Unified Command determined that Elvis's roommate concocted the story concerning Elvis's whereabouts on February 13th, 2017. This roommate is named Rod Abrams. Abrams tries to give him an alibi. He tells a story claiming on February 13th, 2017 that Himself, Rod Abrams, and Elvis, and another man named Ned Smith were visiting a friend in Muncie. Unfortunately for Abrams, this story conflicted with the story that Elvis Fields told law enforcement as to his own whereabouts on February 13th. These shady alibis were relayed to Unified Command. These shady alibis will be further explained in the body of the memorandum, so they'll get to that later. Remember, this is just background, educational purposes you need to know. This is a FYI. Furthermore, Unified Command, Unified Command, I knew I wasn't saying it right, Unified Command, knew that on February 1st, 2018, Elvis's sister passed a polygraph examination when she was asked if she was telling the truth about Elvis confessing to her. I don't necessarily believe that polygraph exams are, fact that people aren't lying, but she took a polygraph. Why did they even ask her to? But she took a polygraph to say, hey, my brother told me this. Which is weird. Like, why did they ask her to take a polygraph for that? I don't know. They didn't believe her for some reason. Unified Command's failure to vigorously pursue the obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism is even more inexplicable when evidence known to law enforcement included information about another Odinite named Patrick Westfall, who was living in Delphi very close to the murder scene on the day of the crimes. Evidence known to Unified Command included the fact that fellow Odinists Patrick Westfall and Brad Holder were close friends as late as January 21st, 2017. However, that friendship ended very abruptly in February 2017, the very next month. The schism in their friendship resulted from a fight that occurred between Holder and Westfall in February 2017, where Holder and Westfall were in the woods near a river conducting a ritual. What does that sound like? What does that sound like? In the woods near a river conducting a ritual. Well, wouldn't you call that ritualistic sacrifice if you were sacrificing them to your god Odin? I think that would qualify. One of them said or did something the other did not agree with, and they no longer talked to each other. The river was near Patrick's house. Remember, Patrick Westfall lives in Delphi, at the scene, near the scene of the crime. Patrick's house. It looks real suspicious. All I gotta say, I don't believe in coincidences. Do not. An intoxicated Brad Holder shared this disturbing information with his ex-wife, Amber Holder. So at the time, they were married, and he told Amber that they were no longer friends because something happened in a ritual in the woods, blah, 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 blah. Somebody did something, but we don't know what. We don't have specifics. Amber Holder then relayed this disturbing information to law enforcement who were not part of Unified Command in 2019. These officers then relayed this disturbing information to Unified Command. Liggett concealed this information from Judge Diener. So all these things that this information is getting up to Unified Command, but it's not going to the judge. The judge is the one who decides if there's a search warrant that's necessary, if the search warrant is warranted, basically. And you're supposed to bring that exculpatory evidence if you have it, knowing that there's these other suspects. The judge would have never signed off on that search warrant. So it's a really strong opening so far, in my opinion. It goes on to say, in 2019, Unified Command learned that in a totally different conversation with his ex-wife, Brad Holder pointed the finger away from himself and directly at Patrick Westfall. as being the person actually responsible for the murders of Abby and Libby. According to police reports, Brad Holder told his ex wife, Amber, that Westfall and his people killed Abby Williams and Liberty German because of one of their mothers was mixing with other people outside the mother's race. If this is a white supremacist group rebranded as a Odinist religion, that might be a good reason for them, not for normal people, but a good reason for them to take the girls' lives. Just saying. Um, Furthermore, Unified Command was aware that Brad Holder had told Amber that I can only protect you so much if you keep asking questions. Basically, let's stop talking about it. Brad Holder further told his ex-wife Amber that Patrick Westfall had many people backing him up and that Westfall also had powerful friends. So who were his friends? Are there people in law enforcement that do this Odinist stuff? We know there's guards. We know there's prison guards. So are there investigators on this case who happen to be, secret Odinists that they're not telling us? Yeah. I have my suspicions that there are a lot of these Odinists in the law enforcement as well. Liggett knew of this information for more than 3 years before Liggett sought a search warrant for Richard Allen's house, yet Liggett never shared that information with Judge Diener. Additionally, Westfall provided a very weak alibi as to his whereabouts on February 13th. Westfall told law enforcement that he was at home the afternoon of Monday, February 13th. The defense is unaware of any search warrant that Liggett sought to enter Westfall's house, or whether Unified Command instructed law enforcement to knock on a single neighbor's door to verify Westfall's alibi. The defense is unaware of any search warrant that Liggett sought to enter Westfall's house or to even verify his alibi. What was it up here? Westfall has very powerful friends. No alibi or no verified alibi and no search warrant. Maybe there's some truth to that. Unified Command's failure to continually pursue the obvious links between the crime scene and Odinism is even more disturbing when evidence known to law enforcement included information about another Odinite named Johnny Messer from Rushville. Johnny was a recruiter for the Odinites and was also the connective tissue between the Odinites from Delphi, Brad and Patrick, and the suspects from Rushville, who were Elvis, Rod, and others. Delphi is located 126 miles from Rushville, so it's not like a quick jump in the car, but you could do it in a day. A couple hours, maybe. Law enforcement knew that Johnny Messer was friends with Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. Law enforcement also knew that Messer was acquaintances with with Elvis Fields and Rod Abrams. Unified Command theoretically could claim, and actually appear to be claiming, that this connection is simply a bizarre coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. There are no coincidences. And when you start to see that, trust me, it's true. Things don't just coincide just because of chance, I don't think. However, Unified Command not only knew that Elvis Fields, Rod Abrams, and Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall share a common acquaintance, Johnny Messer, but also that Elvis and Brad followed each other on Facebook and even mimicked each other's Facebook pages. with Elvis Field actually recreating the photos that Holder posted on his Facebook. So Elvis Fields saw some pictures on Holder's Facebook page and he went and recreated it and then he posted something similar. There's no nexus, says Judge Gull, right? Shockingly, at his August 10th, 2023 deposition, Unified Command member Jerry Holman claimed that he did not even know who Johnny Messer was, nor what the evidence showed of Messer's possible role in the murders of Abby and Libby. It is additionally infuriating that Johnny Messer was cleared as a suspect in the murders when considering these facts. Johnny's girlfriend, Taylor Hornaday, told police that Johnny Messer and Patrick Westfall were like brothers. Johnny Messer and Patrick Westfall are like brothers. Might be in a brotherhood together. She also told police that she had allowed Johnny to borrow her car on or around Valentine's Day 2017. Listen to this. And that Johnny drove her car up there, meaning up to Delphi, to hang out with his Vinlander friends. Vinlander is a word that's interchangeable with those that practice Odinism. A state trooper, Roland Purdy, stated in his deposition all members of Vinlanders are also Odinists. Basically, the Vinlanders are a white supremacist group consisting of Odinists. Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer were all affiliated with the Vinlander group. Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend Taylor Hornaday also confirmed that all Vinlanders were also all Odinists, and that Johnny Messer, Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall were members of Vinlander. They have multiple names for what they practice. Where did we get that? When he returned her vehicle, so he borrows her vehicle to drive up there to Delphi. When he returned her vehicle, it had dried blood over one side of it. Johnny Messer refused to discuss the details of how the blood got there. Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend further stated that it took her several car washes to remove the blood. Meanwhile, didn't she know that there were girls that had just been found? Like maybe, I thought this was like huge news in the area. So I would have assumed that she might have known and maybe considered or put two and two together. I don't know, but I guess not. She went to the car wash and washed it several times. Meanwhile, Messer has claimed that he had never, not once in his life, been to Delphi, home of his quote unquote brother, Patrick Westfall, and near the home of his other Odinite brother, Brad Holder. Messer's ex-girlfriend also told law enforcement that Brad Holder and Johnny Messer were two of the most violent people that she knew and were fully capable of having been involved in the murders. Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend further stated that a motive for their involvement in the murder of Abby and Libby might be the concept of blood in and blood out, which means social acceptance into their secret circles. All this information was relayed to Liggett and the Unified Command team, yet Unified Command provided no guidance as to what to do to capitalize on this information in order to work towards solving the murders. They had no interest. All along the way, they had no interest in actually getting to the truth, it seems. Additionally, Unified Command learned that Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend had been listening to and recording Johnny Messer's phone calls. Police secured the phone and listened to 3 phone calls involving Johnny Messer. In 2 of those phone calls, Messer was, quote, offering money to other people to find someone so they can be injured or killed, end quote. The 3rd call involves Messer, quote, bragging about holding a subject hostage and shooting them at his house, end quote. somebody shot at his house, not there at the crime scene. Maybe that's why there wasn't as much blood there, right? Because I'd like to know how much blood was remaining in either of them. Not to be graphic, I don't know if this was ever even covered, but I think they drained Libby's blood upside down from the tree or somewhere. I don't know why, but I feel that like to my core as to, that like Odin image where he's upside down with the leg bent and he's hanging from the tree for however many days, whatever their legend is. I can't remember it all. I don't care. But the fact is, we've all seen that image, and she's almost positioned in that way on the ground. So I almost wonder if, and and she has blood that's going up her chin, if you recall, I think, or a tear or something that was going upwards. They were seeing that the blood patterns were going up. So she was moved for sure. So I don't know. I have a feeling maybe there was some bloodletting or whatever you want to call it. They were draining her blood to some extent, possibly. I don't know. Not to be graphic, but I just wonder because if this was a sacrifice, don't you hear about, bloodletting when it comes to sacrifices? So that's my morbid take on it. I hope that's not too morbid for all of you. Let's move on to something else. So the third calls for him saying he had a hostage and shooting them, this Messer guy, at his own house. So it might not even be related to the Delphi murders. Holding a subject hostage and shooting them at his house. Maybe this was something completely unrelated. Essentially, Unified Command said nothing to see here regarding Johnny Messer and issued no search warrants for his home. None have been disclosed to the defense, nor did they attempt to utilize an age-old investigative tool referred to as an interrogation to pursue the truth about the involvement of Johnny Messer, Brad Holder, or Patrick Westfall in these crimes. Many more shocking facts concerning this so-called investigation will be revealed in the body of the memorandum. We're only just beginning. Odinites in Westville Correctional Facility guarding Richard Allen. So the evidence shows that during his pretrial incarceration at Westville Correctional Facility, Richard Allen had been monitored, intimidated, and mentally abused by correctional officers who are also members of the Odinite cult. Two of those correctional officers named Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones. Robinson and Jones. These Westville Corrections officers boldly wore patches on their department corrections uniforms that proclaimed "In Odin We Trust," along with another patch displaying symbols of Odinism, which are three interlocking triangles. Both Odinite correctional officers, Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones, also display images of runes and or other Odinite symbols on their Facebook pages. So these guys are probably part of the group. As recently as June 25th, 2023, for example, Odinite Sergeant Robinson openly displayed a photograph of his Odinite altar on his Facebook page. A similar altar can be found on the Facebook page of Brad Holder. Interesting. Beginning at least on April 3rd, 2023, Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson wore their Odin patches when the defense team visited Richard Allen. However, Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones' brazen display of their Odinite patches came to an end on August 17th, 2023. What changed? Why suddenly did they no longer display their Odinite patches beginning on August 17th, 2023? Visit between on the August 17th, 2023 visit between Richard Allen and his defense team. Here is your possible answer. So they were wearing these brazenly with their state issued uniforms as correction officers. But All of a sudden, they just abruptly stopped wearing them. Here's why the defense thinks that. It was not until August 10th, 2023, deposition of Trooper Jerry Holman, that Richard Allen's defense team finally revealed to the prosecutor and to Unified Command that for many months, the Richard Allen's defense team, had been fully aware of the strong evidence linking Odinism to the murders. They thought they were so slick and got away with it, but then Jerry Holman comes in for his deposition, and everyone, all of the officers are interrogated on the Odinist angle and why it wasn't fully investigated. It was also on August 10th, 2023, deposition that the Unified Command learned that Richard Allen's defense team was not only aware of this information, but also intended to expose the linkage of Abby and Libby's murders to Odinism, and would also be revealing the names of the Odinists at trial. Only Nick McLeland put a stop to that. At that deposition, Holman and the prosecutor also learned that the defense team obviously intended on exposing the Unified Command's utter failure in exposing the Odinist suspects, in spite of the powerful evidence of Odinite's involvement in the murders. However, and this is an important note, at his August 10th, 2023 deposition, Richard Allen's team did not let Holman or anyone else know that they were fully aware of the Odinite corrections officers at Westville wearing "In Odin We Trust" patches. So they did not they didn't ask any kind of questions about these guards that they knew. They were fully aware at this time that these guards were wearing Odinist patches, but they didn't let on to anyone at this point that they knew. Richard Allen's defense team's next visit with Richard Allen at Westville following the August 10th, 2023 deposition occurred 1 week later, on August 17th, 2023. Curiously, or perhaps not so curiously, in those 7 days since the defense team reveals their knowledge that evidence linked Odinists to the murders, for the first time, Sergeant Robinson was no longer wearing his Odin patch. Sergeant Jones was not present at that visit. Sorry, the dog was barking at the garbage men. It was almost as if someone had alerted Odinite Robinson that the gig was up because the lawyers knew about the links to Odinism, so lose the patch and pray that the defense attorneys had never noticed the patches on prior visits. Unfortunately for Westville and Unified Command, Rick's defense team absolutely noticed the Odinite patches worn by Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones beginning April 3rd, 2023. Furthermore, Rick's defense team absolutely noticed the conspicuous absence of Sergeant Robinson's Odin patches following Trooper Holman's realization that Rick's defense team was fully aware of the connection between the murders and Odinism, as well as the failure of the Unified Command to follow through on the evidence that linked the murders to Odinism. The court also will learn in the body of this memo that Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson were seemingly always by Richard Allen's side during most, if not every, visit. Normally, corrections officers, usually sergeants and/or Jones, were within earshot of every conversation between Richard and his attorneys. So you think they were eavesdropping? I think so. And between Richard and his wife also. Close enough that Richard would have to be worried about any conversation with his attorneys and with his wife being overheard by Sergeants Robinson and Jones or other correction officers. Beginning on April 3rd, 2023, and for several visits thereafter, the Westville correction officers even videotaped attorney visits. That is like insane. I can't believe they would do this with between Richard Allen and his defense team. They would videotape. Most of the time, if not every time, it was Sergeant Jones or Sergeant Robinson bringing the handheld camcorder to the visit. Corrections officers even required that Richard Allen be positioned facing the window where the corrections officers were videotaping the attorney visits with the held camcorder so that they could get his face on the camera. and read his lips. This positioning of Richard Allen's body would allow the corrections officers to videotape Richard Allen's mouth as he talked to his attorneys. Richard would therefore not be able to privately discuss anything with his attorneys, such as, "The guards are telling me that my wife and family will be killed unless I call my wife and tell her that I killed those girls." To be clear, up to this point, Richard Allen has never spoken these words to his attorneys. The point is that the Westville guards have made the privacy needed for Richard Allen to have that private conversation with his attorneys very difficult and perhaps not worth the risk if you are Richard Allen to say something. Instead, a mentally defeated Richard Allen would continually mutter to his defense team at every visit these types of general questions: Is my wife alive? Is my family alive? Is my wife safe? Is my family safe? So he was worried about the safety and, you know, um, well being of his family. At one such meeting with his attorneys, Richard Allen mumbled in a somewhat incoherent fashion that Odinites were threatening him. It would be important to know that Richard Allen's defense team had never even mentioned the word Odinites or Odinism, or informed Richard Allen that evidence suggests that Odinites murdered Abby and Libby until August 25th, 2023, when his defense team, in the presence of his wife, who was visiting with Rick at the prison, first discovered the exculpatory Odin related evidence to Rick. Rick's defense team felt that having him remain unaware would hopefully keep Rick a bit safer, due to Rick's weakened mental state and the concern that he might unwittingly discuss his attorney's strategy to Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson. Rick's attorneys opted to not discuss Odinism with their client out of fear that Sergeant Robinson and Jones would then be on the alert that Richard Allen's defense team was aware of the Odinite involvement. Richard's defense team needed additional time to investigate and review evidence before feeling confident and comfortable in revealing their knowledge to the court of the strong evidence that Odinites murdered the girls and that Unified Command had chosen to do nothing about it, but in fact had hidden these facts from Judge Diener. Therefore, Richard's defense team opted to keep Richard in the dark about the Odinite connection to the murder supported by the evidence. So basically, they're just saying he didn't know anything about Odinites, and all of a sudden he just says Odinites are going to hurt me here in the prison. Kind of strange. Here's a footnote. It says, "This decision has been painfully and emotionally difficult for Rick's defense team. Defense counsel recognized that while the defense took the necessary time to review the discovery to establish the Odinist links both to the murders and to the Westville Correctional Facility, defense counsel was also aware that Rick would remain in his hellhole at Westville subject to the cruelty of Jones and Robinson and perhaps other Odinite corrections officers. This was especially painful at the June 15th, 2023 hearing to transport Rick to Cass County, as defense counsel knew at that time of the links between the murders and Odinism in Westville. Unfortunately, defense counsel needed additional time to fully understand and verify the facts before leveling such accusations. This is the reason that the defense tactically decided to keep its knowledge to itself rather than reveal that knowledge in open court at the hearing. Unified Command and the prosecution's hiding of exculpatory evidence is even more angering because difficult strategic decisions could have been avoided had McClelland offered the exculpatory documents sooner. Perhaps then Rick would have filed for speedy trial or would have been removed from Westville as the defense would have been able to be more fully inform the court of the facts of the case. So basically, yeah, big mistake on their part, I think. Again, more detailed information concerning the Odinite corrections officers, as well as the documentation supporting the information, will be provided in the body of the memo. Liggett concealed certain witness testimony and falsified other witness testimony in order to prevent Liggett's bogus timeline from being exposed to Diener. Beyond the shocking omissions concerning the pagan cult's links to the murders and the fact that Odinists were also watching Richard Allen, akin to foxes watching the henhouse, the evidence will show that Liggett's affidavit for search warrant is also filed with lies and other concealed information concerning witness testimony. This false and concealed information desperately eviscerates the state's timeline. The evidence will show that Tony Liggett knew of the major problems that these witnesses knew of the major problems that these witnesses' testimony created, and Liggett chose to solve his problem by concealing this information and even falsifying other information in order to bolster the state's bogus timeline. The evidence will show that Liggett concealed facts concerning descriptions that key witness Betsy Blair made directly to Liggett face to face in 2019 concerning 1, the person that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge, 2, a vehicle that she observed at the CPS parking lot. So he lied about, or concealed, I should say. He concealed the facts that when he met Betsy Blair, she saw a vehicle that was totally different than Richard Allen's, but she saw that at 2:15, and he also concealed the fact that she saw a man standing on the bridge that day. For Liggett's timeline to work and to place Richard Allen on the Monon High Bridge at 2:13, the time of the famous Down the Hill video, Liggett desperately needed Betsy Blair to describe a man on the bridge that looked like Richard Allen, and furthermore desperately needed Betsy Blair to describe a car that she observed parked at the CPS parking lot at approximately 2:15 as looking like Richard Allen's black Ford Focus. Suffice it to say, the evidence will show that Liggett concealed from Judge Diener that Betsy Blair described the man on the bridge that looked nothing like Richard Allen and described a car at the CPS lot that looked nothing like Richard Allen's car, both in design and color. The evidence will show that Betsy provided these timeline defeating descriptions directly to Liggett face to face 2 times in 2019, yet Liggett failed to inform Judge Diener of these descriptions as well as inform Diener of the fatal flaws that these missing descriptions created for the timeline. So Liggett didn't tell Diener about Betsy Blair and her observations that day, which would kind of dismiss or make you wonder if Richard Allen was the right person, because who is she describing if it's not Richard Allen? She's describing someone other than Richard Allen, it seems. So who would that, and if it's not his car at the CPS lot, then whose is it? And then it brings up other questions. So I think they were just like, yeah, keep her out of it. The evidence will show that Liggett just flat out lied about what he claimed Sarah Carbo told him in 2017 concerning a man walking down the road near the murder scene. This is the muddy guy who turned into the muddy and bloody guy. For Liggett's timeline to work, Liggett needed Sarah Carbo to describe a man walking down the road wearing a blue jacket who had blood covering his clothing. However, in 2017, Sarah did not say these things. This did not prevent Liggett from affirming under oath that Sarah Carbo did say those things. In fact, what Sarah Carbo actually told Liggett in 2017 was that she observed a man walking down the road wearing a tan coat. Not blue. Blue? Yeah, not blue. A tan coat with clothes that were muddy. Tan coat, muddy clothes. Nowhere did she claim in 2017 that the man she observed was wearing a blue coat. Nowhere in 2017 did she say that the man she saw was wearing bloody clothing. Nowhere. The truth about what Sarah Carbo actually told Liggett in 2017 blows up Liggett's timeline, which is the likely reason Liggett failed to include this information in the affidavit. It doesn't work for his narrative. Additional evidence will be presented in the body of this memo. Defense believes that the evidence strongly supports the contention that Liggett intentionally concealed evidence from Judge Diener and lied about other evidence to Judge Diener in his affidavit for search warrant. However, even if Liggett, in case you're wondering who Judge Diener is, Judge Diener was the judge on this case prior to Judge Gull coming on. He really only was there for the safekeeping order, and then he recused himself for some reason and left the man in solitary confinement for 13 months. That's pretty much what happened. And then Judge Gull took over, and she didn't get him out of solitary confinement either, so she left him there. Where did I leave off? As stated, did I read all that already? Omitting the facts, behaved recklessly. No, I don't think I read that. If Liggett did not intentionally conceal evidence from the judge or did not intentionally place false information into the search warrant, at a minimum, Liggett behaved recklessly when he prepared the affidavit, omitting those facts from Judge Diener and providing false information in the affidavit. As stated in the motion accompanying this brief, the defense must show that Liggett either intentionally or recklessly omitted facts from the affidavit or provided false statements in the affidavit. We're almost done with this part. And then, yeah, so we're getting close to completing the 8 things to know, part 1 of the Franks Memo. I think this is the last part. Evidence supporting these facts were needles in a giant haystack of discovery. To conclude the introductory portion of this memo, the defense would tell the court that the evidence supporting the assertions contained throughout this memo was buried deep in a mountain of discovery, thousands upon thousands of pages of paperwork and hundreds of hours of video, but not buried deep enough. The court will know at the conclusion of this memorandum that the defense is not inventing, fabricating, or exaggerating these facts, no matter how crazy these facts may appear. So the defense is like, we understand that these are kind of outrageous claims, but you know what? If you actually look at the evidence here, you're going to see that we're telling you the truth. Richard Allen's defense team is attaching this memo, the supporting documentation that provides proof that these facts are true. And that is where we're going to end. Part 1. Hold on. No, we're not ending. We still have, hold on. I thought so. Okay. I'm going to read this part and then we'll end. Part 1 is going to be talking about the crime scene. That's going to be episode 2 or part 2 of the Franks Memo. Episode, I think we're on, it'll be 16 or something. 14, I don't know, somewhere around there. 15, 16. I don't know. All right, so this last part. This memo consists of 5 parts. Part 1 will be the description of the crime scene. This description will provide important and necessary context that will allow understanding for the rest of the memo and will also provide insight into the preposterous claims that Sheriff Liggett, that one and only one person, were responsible for these murders. This will be important as Sheriff must claim that Richard Allen acted alone in order to dispel the massive evidentiary foundation that supports the likelihood that the pre-planned abduction and realistic murder of Abby and Libby required multiple Odinites in order to succeed. So in order to act it out in the way that it was, it required multiple Odinites. That's part 1. Part 2 will detail the evidence that connects the Odinites to the murders. Tony Liggett conceals this evidence from Judge Diener. Do you think Tony Liggett might be an Odinite? Maybe. So he concealed this evidence from Judge Diener when Liggett prepared and signed under oath his affidavit for search warrant. This section is long, detailed, and factually dense, so we may have to split that into parts if we need to. Especially for those not living and breathing this case. At the beginning of section 2, defense counsel has provided a Delphi murder infographic, a veritable visual representation of the major players mentioned in this memorandum, as well as a list of names and the relevance of those names found in the memorandum. These documents are offered as reference tools for assistance in unpacking these dense facts. Part 3 will detail the information that confirms that Tony Liggett concealed evidence in his search warrant affidavit concerning statements of Betsy Blair and fabricated statements in his search warrant affidavit concerning Sarah Carbow. Part 4 will consist of evidence that Odinite corrections officers in leadership have been positioned to watch, guard, intimidate Richard Allen since at least early April 2023, also around the time he starts getting Helidol and such, and confessing. This section will also provide images of the patches worn by Sergeant Robinson and Jones, all as well as images taken from their Facebook pages. Part 5 will include information concerning how Richard Allen became a patsy in this investigation 26 days before an election. This section will include information that Liggett failed to provide in his search warrant affidavit concerning the trustworthiness of Dan Doolan's so-called report. Part 4 will also address the complete lack of evidence that links Richard Allen to the murders, including an analysis of the weak evidence that Liggett relied on in his affidavit as he attempted to persuade Judge Diener that evidence was evidence of murders, or that evidence of the murders would be found at Richard Allen's home. I don't know how he got. Maybe Judge Diener is an Odinite. I mean, Odinites can be judges and police officers too, right? Why not? And if you have people up high, then your criminal organization can commit more crimes. Just saying, it makes sense. So that is where we're going to end. So it's going to be interesting, I think, going through it now with a different perspective after the trial and going through it with visuals, being able to look at certain key pieces of evidence that the jury got to look at too. So that is where we will end today. Part 1, like I said, is going to be the crime scene, and we'll have, I'm sure, multiple, we do have multiple exhibits to look at with that as well. I'm sorry, I'm tired. It took me, I got a second win though. I did, like, as I started going, I got more energy, which was good because I thought I was gonna just run out. So anyways, I'm glad I got through it. Thank you guys for watching. Take care. I will see you in the next one where we will go over part 1 of, well, really it's part 2 of my series, but it's part 1 of the Franks Memo where we'll go over the crime scene. So not to be confusing or anything, but that's where we're at. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. That's a wrap on this episode of On the Record. Every document we read comes straight from the official court file. Thanks for watching. Tell me in the comments which official documents should we dive into next.